So first of all, we need to remove the sewing machine and the thread tower and the light, if you can remove it, or we'll use blocks later. Now with everything removed off the top, you can put a block underneath to protect the bobbin winder. Turn it on its top. That way we can access the motor and put the reducer on probably the easiest way because of the weight of everything. So first thing we need to do is remove the staples that hold the power cord that goes to the motor. Just take those out and then save them because we'll reuse them. The next step is to take off the linkage that goes from the motor to the foot pedal. And just remove that. Okay, the next step is to remove the motor from the table. So we'll take off these nuts off the bolts in 3 places. So now we'll lift the motor off of the bolts and just set it there on the table. Okay. So these bolts being too long, we'll remove those. Just tap them out. So now with the 3 carriage bolts supplied, we will install those in the holes from the bottom up. Now with the reducer, it's marked on both sides that have the mounting holes. They have the motor this side, and then the other side goes to the table. Make sure you put the correct side. So we're going to put this side, this marked table, on the table and match up the holes that were in the table to start with. I will put one of the carriage bolts up in the hole. A flat washer goes next. A lock washer, I'm using one of the existing lock washers that was on the motor. And then a nut. So with the bolts just finger tight, we can still slide this back and forth, and what we want to do is line this pulley up with the center of that slot. So with the pulley, the small pulley lined up with the center of the slot, that's going to be the pulley that goes to the motor. It's lined up with the center of the slot, the center of the beltway, and then we're going to make sure it's square with the table by getting the same measurement here as here. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten the 3 bolts in the reducer bracket. Okay. After those are tightened, we're going to set the motor right back on the side that says motor, line up the slots. Now using the 3 bolts, washers and nuts supplied, we'll go ahead and mount the motor to the reducer. Now you want to put the bolt in from the reducer side towards the motor. Make sure you have a flat washer on the bolt. Use the existing large flat washers that were on the motor to start with, a lock washer, and a nut. Okay. So now with those bolts in just finger tight, we can move the motor back and forth on the slots to line up this pulley and the big pulley.
Okay.
Now that the 2 pulleys are lined up, we'll slide the bolts all the way to the furthest position in the slots. As you can see, they slide back and forth in the slots. You don't want them out there. You want to slide them all the way in to the slots and make sure your pulley's still lined up, and then tighten the bolts down. So then after everything's lined up, the bolts are in and everything's ready, kind of make sure that your motor is lined up this way with that pulley as well. You'll just have to use your eye and make sure that's square with this way with that pulley. And once everything's ready, then tighten those bolts down nice and snug. Okay, we have those bolts snug down firm. Keep in mind that you don't want to tighten them too much, because they're rubber mounts and you can just keep squeezing that rubber right out of there if you keep going. So good and firm and then quick. So now you need to replace your staples in your electrical cords. Now make sure your cord that goes to the motor is stapled in such a manner to where it won't interfere with the belt and pulley here. Make sure it's stapled to where it's secure all the way to this side. Now that we have the reducer and motor back in position, we have the table and machine turned right side up, the sewing machine reinstalled, and we will now proceed to fit the belts. Okay, now we're going to put the belt on from the sewing machine to the small pulley on the reduction unit. First of all, we need to loosen the bolts a little bit in the adjustment slots. First of all, we'll loosen the bottom bolt here, the pivot bolt, about 1/4 of a turn. I've already done that. And then on the top bolt, the adjustment itself, we'll loosen it about 1/2 a turn. And I have done that as well. So now the adjustment can be made by moving that into the slot. So all the way at the top, now we'll put the belt on from the sewing machine to the reducer. So just put it on the sewing machine just like you normally would, down through the slot, and then over the small pulley. And then you can just grab the pulley and bring it down to where the belt is somewhat snug. You don't want them real tight because then you just wear your bearings out in the sewing machine and the reducer. But if you just leave that fairly loose, it will work just fine and last forever. So at that position, we'll tighten the 2 bolts in the reducer, the pivot bolt and the adjustment bolt, very snug. Okay, now we're going to fit the belt between the motor and the reducer itself. So what we want to make sure to start with is that the adjustment is at the top of the, close to the top of the adjustment on the motor bracket, so that we can get the short distance of our belt. Now you can mathematically figure out the distance here between this one and the diameters and figure out your belt length, but for me that's not real practical, so I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. You can get a piece of cord or rope, or in this case I've got a piece of an extension cord that I'm going to use to wrap around the pulleys to find the belt length. So we're just going to wrap around the large pulley and around the small pulley on the motor. If you pull those tightly, where this piece meets this piece, we can mark that, and that will be the length of the belt that we need, the minimum length, the smallest length. Okay, shut it off. That cord or rope or whatever it is that you decided to use, we've got the mark on it here. Put it at the end of the tape measure, up to here. So this particular belt length is going to be at the shortest 32 inches, and with the adjustment on the motor you can figure that you've got a couple of inches to play with. So we're going to say that this belt length is going to be 32 inches long. 33 is fine. If you go to your auto parts store to get the belt, then if you do get the wrong one, they'll exchange it for you, and it's handy. Okay, now to get the belt on from the motor to the reduction unit, we'll need to remove the belt from the sewing machine to the reduction unit. So we just tilt back the machine, slip off the belt, and set it aside for now. Now we've got our belt from the auto parts store. We slipped it on there. It's good and loose at the top of the adjustment. So now we want to snug up this belt to the proper tension. We let the adjustment down until we have the correct feel, which is, again, somewhat loose. You don't want those tight, which is bad for everything. Once you get it proper, then we set the jam nuts for this adjustment. Recheck it. It's almost like what you would think would be a little loose, but it works just fine. Now we'll reinstall the top belt over the sewing machine, down through the slot, and then we tilt the sewing machine back a little bit to get the slack in the belt over the small pulley, and it's all set. Everything's already been set. It's set up and ready to go. Now you want to reinstall any of the guards that you've taken off during the process. Put those back on the machine. It is your duty to keep things away from this drive unit. If you need to put guards over the whole system, then you need to do that, but it's your responsibility to keep things out of this area. Mostly your fingers, toes, and kids. So get everything back in place and it's ready to go. So now we're going to fit the linkage between the treadle plate and the sewing machine clutch arm. Now that the motor is lower, then the linkage will need to be shortened. So we just measure between the two holes, the mounting hole in the treadle plate and the mounting hole in the clutch arm. It's about 5.5 inches. So now we have the new linkage. I've shortened each side of the linkage by this amount in order to get at the closest distance 5.5 inches. So anyway, I was going to show you a way to cut this rod if you don't have too many methods of doing it. You know, a chop saw, hacksaw, side cutters. I'm just using a pair of side cutters. If you got a good set and a good solid grip, you can do that with that. Just simply by scoring that. Don't have to cut all the way through, and then you can break it off. You can break it off like that. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and remount the linkage on the machine. Snug those up good. I'm going to adjust the linkage for where you like your foot and get it where you like it, and then tighten the bolt in the clamp between the two linkages.